Online at 560theanswer.com. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios. Only the biggest stories, only the biggest guests, and only the biggest opinions. This is AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan Proft here. Is the putative polarization of America vastly overstated? That's a topic we're going to get into with our next guest. But a couple of points to frame part of our discussion, at least. Sarah Stalker. She's a state legislator, yes, seriously, in Kentucky. In a committee hearing on K through 12 curriculum, this is what she had to say.
I'm going to be honest. I don't feel good about being white every day for a lot of reasons. Because it's a point of privilege that I get to move through the world in a way that so many of my other colleagues and friends and family members of the community don't get the privilege to do. And I'm just a female, but just a woman, just a white woman. If I was a white man, I would be functioning from a point of an even greater privilege. I think we're missing an opportunity when kids have a moment to reflect about how the color of their skin does and does not allow them to move through the world. Running to them and trying to stifle that and trying to say you shouldn't feel bad, so we don't want to ever expose you to something that is going to make you have to pause and have maybe some internal feelings. It's a missed opportunity for some really good dialogue.
Sure, because critical race theory can't start too soon. That polarizing, that's somebody who has, in part, her hands on the purse strings for K through 12 education in Kentucky. Excuse me. NPR has something called a domestic extremist correspondent. Of course they do. NPR, government-run media. NPR's domestic extremism correspondent is a woman named Odette Youssef. This is what she had to say on all things considered as it pertains to immigration policy. And how, in point of fact, conservatives are the identitarians. And they use code words like Western civilization to disguise their racism.
And so it has been clear that the removal of people is violent.
But what are you hearing, Odette, from White House officials when they are being asked why they are using terms that are adopted by white nationalists?
The White House, the Department of Homeland Security, and the State Department all rejected or didn't acknowledge the European extremist roots of this policy idea when I asked them about it. But I think it's important also to add the context of other terms that this administration has been using, talking about Western values, Western civilization, chiding European allies for making themselves vulnerable to civilizational suicide or civilizational erasure. Byrick says this is language that sits firmly within the rhetoric of the identitarian and broader white nationalist movement.
Right. Those that are counting by race are not the identitarians. Those suggesting that there's a difference between U.S. citizens and people who came here illegally, regardless of where they came from. 180 countries represented. Tom Homan mentioned yesterday, as we talked about earlier in the program, ICE has apprehended people in this country illegally from 180 countries. And the philosophy is simple.
I'm so tired of them pulling the race card all the time,
right.
Because we're doing this racist. ICE has arrested people from 180 different countries. Europe, Asia, South America.
Every color.
They're not just arresting brown and black people. They're arresting people from all over the world. The immigration enforcement is colorblind. There's one thing that matters to us. Did they follow the immigration law? Are they here legally? Did they break the law once they became here, either illegally or legal? It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So we're following the law. That's all that matters to us. Title 8 United States Code, Title 18 United States Code, the Immigration Nationality Act, what that says, we're enforcing without apology.
Pleased to be joined by our next guest. His name is John Butcher. He's the Will Skillman Fellow in Education at the Heritage Foundation. He's got a new book, The Polarization Myth, America's Surprising Consensus on Race, Schools, and Sex. Jonathan Butcher, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Great to be with you.
All right. I understand that there are outliers in terms of reporting. There are outliers in terms of sort of man-on-the-street incidents. There are outliers in terms of legislators, and they're used as sort of Rorschach ink blots for people who have disagreement on these issues. And it may present more polarization of opinion than actually exists in the body politic, at least the intensity of it. However, and I read your piece in the New York Post, boy, I'm not convinced, despite some of these survey numbers that you developed as part of your research, that they really address the polarization argument in a way that suggests there is a real sort of foundation, there's a real consensus upon which we can build in the same direction. You know what I mean? For example, when you say, when one of the survey results, yours, Americans care about character and virtue and want children in school to learn about these things. Well, sure. But that's very generic. You could have within that 74% in favor of that statement, half of that statement being learning about character and virtue is spending all your time on race identity politics like Sarah Stalker, the Kentucky legislator, wants to do, and decrying the bad orange man in the White House. You know what I mean?
Well, it could be, but this is not the first survey that's turned up these results. And in fact, we asked this survey in 2021, that question in 2021 as well, about what parents want taught in schools. And so it's character and virtue, and then paired with another question from our survey that asked parents and the general public if they wanted civics taught more. And there was also a very strong response to that. 57% in this particular survey said that they wanted civics taught more. So character and virtue is one step and one question that we asked, but it's not the only one. We also asked about whether or not civics should be taught more. And it is true. I mean, it's not every. Yeah,
but what's the substance under that? I mean, character. These are broad terms. For example, teaching character could be teaching the yard sign I have in my yard that says no person is illegal and love is love and so on and so forth. Could be all of the aphorisms of the left that are dressed up as something like character formation, which it's not, in my view.
Well, it could be, but I think that when the words character and virtue come to mind, I think there's enough of a sense of national identity that we do think about words like responsibility and honesty. And I think the what we see from other responses to my survey, including questions about whether or not we should teach children to finish high school, get a job, or enter college and get married before having children, there was also very strong responses in favor of that. So, asking one question in the survey is really just the prompt for other questions that we also asked that help to frame out what that character and virtue looks like. And I can tell you from our responses, civics was high on the list. So was the success sequence, which is what I just described to you about finishing high school and getting married before having children. So that helps to even out and fill in the blanks about what that character and virtue looks like among this same population.
Well, there's another aspect to that too, right? The other aspect is, what are you willing to fight for? And I mean this intellectually and in the context of the traditions of Western civilization, peacefully. But for example, you say, people should finish high school, don't commit a crime, get a job, don't have kids before you get married. But if you don't do any of those things, no problem. We've got a welfare state for you. We've got 42 chances before you face serious jail time, as we've seen play out again and again and again in major metropolitan areas, with the support of major metropolitan areas, not just the city proper. So, I guess the point is to say, like, I believe in these things, but, I'm not a real stickler about it. I'm not like a fanatic. I don't really care. We'll provide all sorts of excuses and rationalizations and, frankly, even disincentives to actually operate in that direction, to actually even institute that sort of education in K through 12 in K through 12 government schools, despite the sort of the virtue signaling I'm doing, saying, well, of course I believe in character and virtue. Of course I believe in teaching civics.
Well, I think you make a good point there, because the survey can only get us so far. It's a valuable use of taking the temperature of the American public, but researchers know that we shouldn't just base public policy on survey results. So in my book, I talk about the research behind good public policies dealing not just with preventing crime, although I do have some of that in there and ideas for how to prevent crime. And I also have research in my book talking about why there should be school choice, for example, for families to be able to choose how and where their children learn. So I think when you pair survey results with solid academic research showing what produces positive outcomes for young people, which, by the way, the success sequence among millennials who practice all three parts of that success sequence that I just described for you, 90% of them were not living in poverty by the time they hit their mid-20s and were headed towards their 30s. So there is research demonstrating, right, that the survey responses matter and are backed up by the literature, showing that when we create policies that help students succeed in school, that promote the idea of marriage, we can set up a positive, set of outcomes for them going forward in their life. So it's not just the survey results. They're a step towards, I think, a very healthy discussion about how to frame good public policy.
Yeah, I mean, but again, I mean, the problem comes in. For example, the survey on biology. There's two sexes, and men should not play women's sports. Right? Okay, that's a majority opinion. But it just takes a few to completely upend that, right? It just takes Leah Thomas in a pool to upend that for everybody else and a handful of others. And people rallying to their defense that have, cultural heft and political influence. And it becomes this protracted fight, even though it's a relatively small percentage of the people who believe those things. So I just, I hear what you're saying, but that second piece of it, I think, needs more development in terms of how do we allow ourselves to be essentially held captive by small percentage of the population, or relatively small percentage of the population, on the range of these issues.
Well, I think that was only for a short period of time. Now, I don't want to undermine those who were affected by it, because it was certainly important, but that's just it. If they overshot their target when it came to saying that there are multiple genders and that boys should participate in girls' sports. And now you have laws across the U.S. in states that prohibit the use of taxpayer spending on programs that promote gender, or even the teaching of gender to kids in K-12 schools. That's being banned in states like Florida and Texas. So there has been a movement now when we expose the damage that's caused by these policies. And the reason then for the polling is that the polling backs up this policymaking, right? It backs up these policies from executive orders from governors saying that boys should not be allowed in girls' bathrooms, or state legislatures that are saying that young children K through 3 should not be learning about gender. There is polling that shows that Americans agree with those things. We are not polarized on those issues. It is a shame that we had to get there, right? It's a shame that we even had to have this conversation. But the way that we can build good policymaking is by showing sound research about the effects of these policies and showing polling about where Americans stand on these issues and whether or not more advocacy needs to be built in order to create a constituency. And I think on the issue of gender in particular, I think there is a solid constituency in America saying that we should protect women in private spaces, and that there are only two sexes.
Yeah, and I mean, the polling does have value, too. I don't want to dismiss it out of hand. I mean, it's sort of the the converse of the Saul Alinsky tactic to make the majority believe they're the minority. And what you're doing here with some of the survey research is telling the majority that they are actually the majority, and they should recognize that. So that has utility in contravention of the Alinsky tactics of the left. So I do see that. Jonathan Butcher, Will Skillman Fellow in Education at the Heritage Foundation, his book, The Polarization Myth, America's Surprising Consensus on Race, Schools, and Sex. Jonathan, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And he joined us on the Turnkey.pro answer line.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
The biggest time of the year for stores is during the Christmas season. And if you deal in collector coins, the main source for inventory is from people like you. We want to have our showcases fully stocked before Christmas. Last Christmas, gold was the high